All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the winter. Summer 2018. We're not winter 2018 anymore. We're summer 2018. I'll fix that. Session at Centennial. I totally threw myself off there. We are week 2, part 3 of our broadcast. We're talking about functions and data. I'm just going to review what we did yesterday. So a couple things we talked about was just at the end of the day was this stuff about switching between titles. We talked about that a little bit. We said we had this title elements. We also talked about what the difference between let and var is. Who can remember what the difference is between let and var? Yes.
Like var is like the variables go back to the top.
What is it called? What's the word? Hoisting. Hoisting. It's a very good thing. Interview question. What is hoisting? You know what it means for JavaScript, right? So hoisting means you hoist everything to the top. But that's what JavaScript does. The interpreter, because JavaScript is an interpreted language, right? The browser goes through and reads line by line, and then it goes, hey, there's a variable declaration. Okay, let's move this to the top, right? And so normally it doesn't cause many problems, but sometimes, you know, what you expect for JavaScript to do is not what you get with it. And so that's why we recommend using let. Let is the newer version of JavaScript. It's ECMAScript 6 and beyond, right? Uses let, and it's supported by most browsers now. So I recommend let. So we said let title instead of var. Let title is equal to this document. Now we have this document thing that we did, right? Remember we talked about this, something called the document object model. We haven't really covered that yet, but I want you to think about it for now as the document container, the HTML document. That's what it should be in your mind. I want you to think of it like that. So when I say document, I'm pointing to the HTML document. In this case, it depends on which HTML document the app.js file is pointing to or connected to. Right now, if I start off with index.html, it's pointing to the index.html file as an example, right? So it says, okay, take a look at the document, read the title of the document, and assign it with the assignment operator equals to title. That's what's happening. So take the title, the document title, and assign it to this variable that we made called title. Notice also that JavaScript requires a semicolon. Wait, does it require a semicolon? If I want to, can I choose not to use a semicolon? Some people say no, some people say yes. Okay, who says no? Who says I don't need a semicolon? Okay, who says I need a semicolon? Yeah, people who say you need a semicolon are wrong. In JavaScript, do not need a semicolon to run, but I recommend using a semicolon, okay? Please use a semicolon, because what it does is it explicitly tells the interpreter, right, that it separates commands. That's what it does. It says, hey, this is at the end of a command, right? When you have a programming language, most C influence programming languages, and JavaScript is a C influence programming language. So if you've taken C# or C or C++, even Java, right? It's very similar in terms of its syntax. You've already taken C#, at least the rudiments of C#, and you're into programming too. So I'm not going to go over what a variable is and all those kind of things like I talked about. You should know that a variable is a data container, right? So at the end of the day, what we're doing here is we're assigning this title to the title. And then we're using a switch case. Again, did I cover switch case here already? No, I didn't. But I can use it because you should have seen switch case kind of statements in C#, yeah? So it's very similar. If you notice, I have the switch statement, which is like a series of if-elses, if else, if else, if else, conditional statement, right? And what it does, this conditional statement takes the title that I got from my document, and it says, okay, so depending on what the string value of the title is, and notice if I hover over here, Visual Studio Code gives me this string value. It says it's a string. Because, how does it know? Because we assigned a string up here. And remember, JavaScript is loosely typed, right? But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any types. It has data types, right? It has the string data type. It has the Boolean data type. It has the number data type. It has other data types that you'll see as well. But they're loosely typed, which means that when I assign something, JavaScript says, oh, that must be a string. That must be a number. That must be a Boolean, whatever it is. It tries to figure it out. Something almost like type inference is what it's called, right? It tries to infer, but by what you're assigning, what type it is, okay? C# has this as well. You can use var in C#, believe it or not. If you go back to C# and use a var keyword, it will try and use type inference to assign a data type to a variable in C#. So it does work the same way in some ways. But C# is strict, and whereas JavaScript is not. You can reassign the variable. So for example, if I had something like this, and if I said something like, well, title now is equal to a number, like 35 or 35, right? That's allowable. That's perfectly legal to do, even though I signed it as a string here. Well, now it's a number, right? But hold on, look what it says. Let title is equal to string. And if I go down here, it says title is equal to string, but I can still assign it as 35, right? Even though I've set it up as title up here. It's not giving me an error. And that's one of the challenges with JavaScript, right? It won't give you errors. It won't like underline something like in C# and say, hey, something's wrong. What are you doing? Yes?
So it will treat 35 as string?
Oh, it'll treat 35 as a number, right? And so when I come here, both of these will fail, right? Because both cases are not numbers. This is a string, and I'm looking for a number 35, right? And neither of these are a number, and so it's just not going to do either of them. So we can do this. That's why JavaScript can be dangerous, because it doesn't really give you any code hinting whatsoever and say, hey, something's wrong here, like C# does, like C does, like C++ does, like Java does. Every other language tells you there's a problem. Or maybe even PHP doesn't do that too. One day you'll learn PHP if you haven't done it already. And it doesn't give you a lot of code hinting. It doesn't give you a lot of tooling. That's what JavaScript does not do. And so people don't like that, okay? One thing we did use, we use this use strict, so it gives us a little bit of error, right? And now it should tell us there's something wrong here. So if I save this, and just to recall what we did last day, I'm just going to pull up a terminal window. So I'm going to open up a command prompt. And in command prompt, if I do light-server, right, as an example, and launch it, okay, let's take a look at what we get on the console here. So on the console, we get an error. We said title 35. It says failed to load resource to server favicon. Okay, hold on a second here. That's just another error, another weird error. But it says title is equal to 35. Right? Hold on. What the heck did we just do? Right? Well, we did a couple things, right? One thing we did was we said that somewhere along the line, we want to put, kind of print out the document title, which is down here. We did this part, document title. But now what about if I want to make this button work? Can I make the button work on my home page? So I'm on my home page. I click the button, and I got nothing. Why? Because we put the button code inside here. And it's looking for the home as a title, but we've given it 35, right? Which is random and wrong, right? If I took this out, just to give you an example, right? And I press save and I go back, and if I click this now, it works, right? Because now the title is right. It's the right title that I'm looking for, and the button works. About page doesn't have a button, right? It identifies it as the about page and changes things up too, right? No problem. So these are ways of using one single JavaScript file and using a switch case statement to determine which page I'm looking at right now. So example, if I'm on the home page, maybe I have some kind of script for the home page. If I'm on the about page, maybe I have some kind of script for the about page. Yes?
So it means that we have put 35 over there, we need to change the title in the document.
Nope. All it means is that title is just a string, and I'm getting the string from the document into the title, right? And if I assign my variable title again to something else, it'll take it. It doesn't matter what I assign it. I can assign it an array. I can assign it a Boolean. I can say the title is true, like this. I can say that here. I can say that title, right, is equal to true, right? Well, that doesn't make any sense. A string being true, but it'll take it. JavaScript will say, well, now you've changed my type to a Boolean, right? So that's weird. That's kind of weird, and that's what we want to avoid. So you're going to have to be very extra careful when it comes to using JavaScript for now. Here at the end of the course, I'll show you something else that makes it easier. But for now, you need to kind of look at this and go, okay, so if it's a title, I need to use it or a string type. I need to use it as a string. So here, but I want to talk about this piece because this piece might be concerning some people when they look at it, right? I got this switch case kind of idea, right? And the switch case, it's very similar to what we've seen in C# or in C or in Java. And what it is basically we can take the title element or the title variable, and then we can kind of determine if, it's like using an if else, right? If the title is this, then do this stuff. If otherwise, if the title is this, then do nothing. And I can also put a default case as well. If I say something like defaults, right? I can also have a default case, just like we do normally in JavaScript or in C or whatever, right? Or sorry, in C# or in Java or in other languages, other C influenced languages, okay? So that's the switch case. I'm giving it to you early because we need it, because we're going to use it for determining which page that we're targeting with our JavaScript file, our app.js. Because why? Because if you look at both pages, index.html, right, at the bottom, and about.html, both use the same JavaScript file. Both use the same JavaScript file, right? So if I didn't have this switch stuff happening here, then all the commands would pertain to all the pages. So unless both pages had the exact same stuff, for example, if I wanted to target my navigation, both pages will have a navigation bar. So I don't have to put a specific, something in here if I don't want to, right? If I wanted to target the navigation somehow, and if it was the exact same, then I wouldn't have to put it in the switch case, right? By the way, this is not the only way to do it. You could have multiple JavaScript files, one for every page, if you really want to. It's pretty crazy, right? I mean, sometimes we do it because, we have a very specific thing we want to do with a page compared to some other page, right? And sometimes we have more than one JavaScript file, one for all pages, one for a specific page, one for a special effect that we want, and whatever. But I just wanted to get you to understand remember there's 3 ways to attach JavaScript to our pages. One way is inline, so embedded inside the actual line of the HTML. Bad, right? We said that's bad, right? The other way to do it is internal, which is like put a script tag, and inside the script tag do some JavaScript. That's also bad because it's page specific, right? And the third way that's embedded is, it's like that's one way of doing it. Internal or embedded is the same thing, right? And then the third way, which is the way we're using here, is external, which is better. It's cleaner. It's unobtrusive, which we talked about first day, right? Okay, so cool. So we talked about a couple things. I want to keep this structure for a second, but I want to get right into functions a little bit. So I've got this code. Don't worry about what it does right now because we haven't talked about it too much. But I mean, I could clutter up each of these things with more code. Like, for example, well, I could say something like, I want to change, the paragraph of a document, and we'll talk about how to do that in a second, depending on which document it is. But that would have to put all my code in here, and it clutters this up. And I'd rather have another function that I call in here as opposed to putting it as part of my start function. For example, maybe I want to make a function named something like home content. Okay, hear me out for a second. So I'm going to put it up here. There's a new function. The way we do functions, by the way, today's function day and data, right? So there's 2 ways that we really know how to do functions, okay? And I'm going to show you both ways. One way, a named function like this. So we can call it something like, home content. Notice I'm using upper camel case for my naming convention. You don't have to, all right? That's one way of doing it. So I use the keyword function. I use my own identifier, a named function, with parentheses, all right? And then curly braces to denote, right, the function scope. This is the function block or code block for the function belonging to this home content function. That's one way of doing it. Okay, you're going to get mad at me, but this is the other way to do it. And it's a little uglier. But actually, you'll see it a lot. Let home content equal to function. That's also another way of declaring a function. And you're going to look at that and go, Okay, that is messed up. What the heck is that? I don't ever saw that kind of format before. That's not C influence, Tom. That's not like C#. What are you doing? You're telling us it's like C#, but it's not. It's not like C# in that way. What I'm really saying is, hey, let's declare an anonymous function, so no named function, but we're making a pointer to this function or a reference to it called home content, right? So home content is now pointing to this anonymous function, right? Home content is the same as me having a name function, but it's just a different syntax. It's exactly the same functionality, no difference. Well, for you, there's no difference. There is a difference, but let's just leave it at that for now, okay? So this is one way of doing it, and the other way, like I said, is the other way, which I prefer. I prefer this way for now, for us, where we have the name function, so the keyword function, and the identifier name, home content, right? And then parentheses. That's my preferred naming method for functions, okay? So please, let's use this for now. If it changes, I'll let you know. So again, if I was going to type it again, function, home content, the name of the function, parentheses, curly braces, okay? We can also have return. Function can return data, right, with a return statement. For example, return something or another, whatever I want. I can use the return keyword. Even if I don't have any parameters. Notice in the parentheses, just like normal, we can have parameters, right? Like, for example, maybe I want some kind of thing in to give the home content function. In this case, I don't. Well, you can have parameters, and you can have a return statement. If I assign a return statement to a function, just like methods in C#, then it will have a return type. So I can actually use the function in a sentence like, this variable is equal to this function, home content, right? And home content will return data. We'll talk about that later.
Can we access something from inside a function without returning as well?
No. So again, if that's a good question, can I return data from inside a function without returning a value? No. Because a function, I want you to think about a function as a closure. It encapsulates the data. It's a scope, a different scope, and we're going to talk about scope again. So I want to take this stuff, I want to cut it out. You cannot in C# either. Yeah, but that's different. That's using a reference variable. That's using a pointer, basically. All right, so here what we've got is I've just taken out this HTML content that I had, the JavaScript stuff from here, and I put it into my home content function, and now I'm going to call the home content function here. Right? This is the same. All I've done is move my JavaScript there. I'm still calling the home content function here, and this is being called from here. This is the stuff that I'm doing. It's still doing all this stuff, right? And I'm calling it here. It's much cleaner look because now my start method can actually, control what's going on here, right? It's going to say, hey, this is a little clearer of what's happening, right? It's going to say, well, when I go to my home, then, execute the home content. And maybe home content isn't the right name. If you really think what we're doing, we're actually controlling the home content, or we're displaying home content, or we're adding some kind of thing or whatever, right? It's up to you how you want to name it, though. But you got to think about that it's somehow contextual. Makes sense, in other words. All right, so that's one thing that I wanted to point out. So functions, we name them with the function keyword and the identifier name, parentheses, and they may or may not have a return type or return statement, and they may or may not have parameters. In this case, no parameters, no return. Okay. Here, what we've done is just to let you know from last day is we use this method called getElementById. Okay, and I kind of skimmed over this really quickly yesterday. So getElementById, I want you to think about it as a search. So what it does, it says, hey, document. Calls the document. It's almost like I'm calling out to the hey, document, right? And then I'm like, and the document answers, yes, I'm listening. Okay, I want you to find, it's like I'm calling out to the document, right? An element called about button. And the document says, okay, I got it. If we're in the home page, right? And then if I have it, right, it assigns a reference to it, to this element, right, to the About button. I call this hooking onto the element. So I'm actually creating a reference, a hook. Think of whatever you want to call it, right? You want to hook into my element. And I'm doing this by first searching for it. Hey, document, give me that About button. If the document doesn't have one, it's going to say, sorry, there's no document, there's no About button, error, because I'm trying to assign something that doesn't exist, right? That's what it's doing here. So if I try to do this in the About page, it would give me an error saying there is no About button, sorry, right? And there's ways around this. You can actually put an if statement around the let statement. Like, for example, if let About button equal document.getElementById, right? If it exists, or if I can say something like if document.getElementById About button is equal to true, I'm checking to see if I got something, if it exists, right? Then let About button equal to document.getElementById About button, right? You can do it that way too. At the end of the day, what we're saying is we have to be sure before we assign something like this that the About button will exist, right? If it doesn't exist, this will return false. It will return false, or actually undefined is what it's going to return, right? Undefined goes here, and then we're trying to assign something that's undefined. It doesn't know what to do with it, and we have an error. That's the first part. So get element by ID. There's the exercise that I put up on eCentennial already. You're going to use that today. Get element by ID is like, hey, document, find me the element that I'm looking for, and it has to have this ID. That's why it's get element by ID. There's also get elements by class name, get elements by ID, multiple elements, which creates an array, and a bunch of other ones, which we're going to handle another day. All right. I just want you to get this one because this is the most common way of hooking into a single element. All right, to create a reference to a single element, because I can affect the content on the page with my JavaScript by hooking into or creating a reference with that element. Okay, cool. So now that I did this, that's cool. Now I did something else. Whoa, man, what the heck is this? About button, and then I added this dot, and then an add event listener, and all this other stuff, right? Well, first of all, now that I have this About button, if you notice what Visual Studio Code does, it says that the type of this button now, it's not a number, it's not a array, it's not a string, it's none of those things. Actually, it's a type HTML element. Notice it says that here, right? HTML element is a data type, right? It's a data type of the document object itself. So the document object itself has many different kinds of things, and one of them is an HTML element. We have many HTML elements on the document. An H1 tag, HTML element, right? A paragraph tag, HTML element. An anchor tag, the A tag, HTML element, which is what we've done here. We've actually hooked into an HTML element and got a reference to it, and that's why Visual Studio Code is saying About button is of type HTML element. And because it is, it has some new functionality, right? Let's now give you some space here so you can see. For example, my About button, now that I have is an HTML element. If I press the dot accessor method, the dot in C and all C-influenced languages, typically what it does allows you to do a couple things: access properties, access methods. Those are the two things it does, or functions, however you want to say. Methods and functions, some people call them methods, some people call them functions. To me, let's just call them methods, right? But if you think of what it does, it has all of this capability now. Because it's an HTML element, I've made it an HTML element by doing this, right? Now it has a bunch of stuff it can do. For example, attributes. It also has, notice that there's this little square here like this, and there's this little cube here like this, right? These mean different things. What do you think the cube means? Come on, guys. The cube. It's a method. The cube is a method, and this little square here that looks like a brick, right? This is a property. Or, you know, so there's properties and methods. Properties and methods. And you can see that it says method here too. That was a kind of a hint, right? And if you notice, there's a lot of properties and methods that I can attach to this button because I made it an HTML element. Because I said, hey, document, get that ID, right? that ID about button, right? And it exists because in the home page, button does exist, right? And you can see that there's a bunch of other stuff. For example, the children of the button. I can also use the click method of the button, right? I can use a bunch of other stuff. Look, these are all the things that I've made. And by the way, don't think about this as a button. Think about it as an anchor tag. That's what really we've done. We've hooked into an anchor tag here, right? And I'll show you this in a second on the index.html page. So there's contains, there's dataset, there's dir, there's a bunch of other stuff that I can hook into. Look, these are all things, first child element, get attribute node. Whoa, get element by class name, get elements, multiple elements by class name, right? Get elements by tag name, get elements by tag name NS. We'll talk about that later. Has attribute, and so on, a bunch of other stuff. And there's also other things that we're going to get into. One of them is inner HTML, inner text, right, which we're going to hook into as well today, is connected, lang, last child, local name. These are all part of the button now because all HTML elements have all this stuff. The HTML element object, right, has all of these methods and properties attached to them. But we don't know what kind of HTML element we're hooking into, right? Some of them make sense, some of them don't. And JavaScript doesn't care. You can access it, and if it doesn't make sense for that element, it'll just ignore it, which is makes people angry, right? Because wait a minute, you say you have all these properties and methods. Yeah, but it doesn't make sense for a button, so it doesn't work. So why would you try and do that? But you say, I could do it. Yeah, you can, but it doesn't work. So that's how it is, right? So there's a bunch of other stuff here. And if I scroll down, you can see that there's a bunch of stuff. Hey, look, there's onClick, right? And a bunch of other things for the button. On mouse over, on mouse down. You can have a bunch of different elements, right, for this HTML element. All these on methods, right? All these on properties, all these on properties are event types. These are event types. And we'll talk about events in a second. Okay, so then there's other ones. There's query selector all. We're going to hit query selector and query selector all. These two things, these two methods, query selector and query selector all, are the two reasons why we don't use JavaScript, jQuery anymore as much as possible, right? Because jQuery kind of does what query selector and query selector all does. It just makes JavaScript a little easier. That's what jQuery, that library, does, which we're going to cover later on in the course. There's also remove childs. There's remove attributes. There's a bunch of other stuff you can do. There's set attributes and stuff like this. Set attribute, we can think about that. There's slots, style. What the heck is that, right? Change the style, right? The title, we can add a bunch of other stuff here. And you can see that there's some other stuff here that are these little squares, little envelopes. And this is what it's doing is saying, hey, you kind of mentioned console and document and get element by ID and home content and log and start and window in your JavaScript file. And so we're listing them here, just in case you mean that. That's what it's doing. But at the end of the day, all these purple and blue properties and purple methods, right, that you see here of the HTML element, in this particular case, it's just a button, right, you can access. So if I wanted to change the name of my button, going back to my index.html for a second, you can see that I have my ID is about button. In order for me to hook into any element, I need to give it some kind of way of hooking into. I need to give it an identifier, either an ID, class, something. There's got to be a way for me to connect to it, for me to find it in the document somehow. Otherwise, what am I? How am I? Think about me targeting something. I'm targeting this element. I'm going, okay, where is the button? Oh, there it is, the button. The button has this ID, right? It's just like CSS in some ways, right? So CSS kind of says, hey, an anchor tag with an ID of about button. That's what kind of, you can do that too, right? And here's a class. The class, there's another identifier for this button. It has this class with a bunch of different classes in here, a button class, the button primary class, the button large class. This all comes from Bootstrap. We can ignore this for now. But this thing here we put in last day is the key way of creating a reference to this particular anchor tag, right, for JavaScript. There's other ways too. And notice on the right, you can see that there is this learn more text. Learn more. So going back to the whole box model. Remember the box model in CSS? Anyone? Come on, I know. I'm talking about last semester. Oh my God, you've wiped your brains of last semester, right? Because now you go back and you're thinking about CSS. And you're like, I have no idea what CSS is, Tom. I have no idea whatsoever, right? So let's just do a brief thing with the box model, because you need to know the box model. Remember, we talked about the 3 layers of web design. You can't forget about the presentation layer.
There's a keyword role. There's something.
The who?
Role. In your code. You're just showing some code.
Wait, we'll go back. I'm going to show you something else first.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to concept board here and draw some stuff. All right. Again, I'm doing it on concept board so we can share this. So when you're looking at this online, you can look at this beautiful drawing someone did, right? Which we're going to just erase for now. All right. So what we want to do though is I want to talk about the box model a little bit, right? Just really briefly as a review, right? So what I want to do here is I want to think about these boxes. So imagine that here's my HTML element. So the whole HTML document looks like this. Let's say it's a big box, right? This is the HTML document, let's just say, right? Inside of the HTML document, right, there is a head and there's a body. Look at these boxes I'm drawing. This is the box model, guys, seriously, right? And inside my body, I might have, right, some kind of paragraph tag. And I might have some other tags in here as well. Okay, let's make these different. Okay, so just so you can see them. So I'm going to kind of connect this one and make the paragraph tag, I don't know, red. And we'll make this other, whatever tag it is. Maybe this is the H1 tag and this is the paragraph tag. So make the paragraph tag here orange, right? So you can see that there's different boxes, right? Okay, but these are still containers. What about the text that's inside the paragraph tag, right? Well, that's another object, right? And then maybe if you want to categorize the text, let's make another kind of some text. So here's the text inside the paragraph tag. There it is. And that text inside the paragraph tag, right, is a child. All of the text is a child or children of the paragraph element, right? And the paragraph is a child of the body element. And the body is a child of the HTML document. That's how the box model works, right? The containers. And furthermore, the box model has 3 things. You can have margin, a border, and padding, right? That kind of space out the box model any way you like. When you create a container like a div tag, as an example, and then you can say, well, I want to have the div tag is going to have a margin on the left side of 30 pixels. It's going to push it over by 30 pixels from the left, right? So that's what the box model is all about. If you think about it, just containers within containers within a box within a box within a box. So if you think about it this way, and let's just simplify this, and I'm just going to get rid of all this stuff now, just to give you an idea, right? So if I have this box, which is the button, so I have the button box. Here's the button box. Inside there, I need a couple other things, and there's another child element I need for every button or every anchor tag, which is the text element, or the text of the button. It has to say something like submit, reset, send, login, whatever the button's called, right? That's the text element, and it's usually somewhere on the right side of the button of the anchor tag, okay? Whether it's a button or anchor, you need this inner text, and I'm just gonna make this a different color, right? And I kind of just said it, I kind of gave it away, inner text. The inner text is the child of the anchor tag, right? Okay. So if we know this, I went through this whole thing for a reason, because when I go back to code, right? I know, my maniacal laugh. Here's my about button. If I want to change the inner text of my button, so instead of saying learn more, I want to say about, I can do something like this. I can say dot inner text, right, is equal to about. Okay? If I wanted to do this, the about button, if we're right, the about button will change the text from learn more, because that's what it says right now in my index.html. It says learn more. We'll change it, hopefully, to about, right? Let's see if it does this. I'm going to save this whole thing, and I'm going to go back to my page, right, which is way over here. And if I go to home, we should see, oh, see how that changed really, really fast, right? Let's reload that. Wait, see how that changed from learn more to about, right? So what did it do? It waited for the page to load, and as soon as the page was finished loading, we changed that thing to about. I targeted my button by get element by ID. I said, hey, document, find that button that has an ID of, and then after I found that button, I changed the inner text to whatever I want. I could do all kinds of stuff, right? So this is what I did. I kind of said that my inner text, which is the child element of my HTML element, it's the inner text, I changed it to about. I can also change the inner HTML. That means that let's suppose that a div tag had a paragraph tag inside of it. The paragraph tag is actually inner HTML. That means I can inject HTML in my page, right? Because I can change the inner HTML to whatever I want. Okay, I'll get back to that in a second. But for now, I want you to know that I can change the inner text of an object to this, right? Okay, that's cool. Let's leave that there for now. So we have this as a reminder, because I'm going to get you to do the same thing in your exercise today. All right, so inner text, this inner text object or property, that's what it is, of the about button points to this. This is the about button. It's styled as a button, but actually it's an anchor tag. It's actually a link that's been styled to look like a button through Bootstrap. That's what Bootstrap does. It makes a link look like a button, right? Through styling, through CSS, right? And then I have this about. That's what it says now. But if I refresh, you can see that it was learn more and then poof, about. It's kind of weird, right, for me to do that kind of stuff. But I can literally create whatever element I want this way. Okay. So that's one thing. So that's one thing I can do when I have HTML elements that I hook into by doing this, by using get element by ID. All right. Again, 2 parts to it. Actually, there's 3 parts. The document. Hey, document. The method that I'm searching with. Get element by ID. 1 element. Get element by ID. 1 element. And then the ID of that element, about button. And if you look here, I have that ID right here that I put there. About button. Okay, that's what I've done. Okay, now I've got a reference to it in about button. About button is an HTML element. Because it's an HTML element, I can do inner text, right? By the way, it may not make sense for all elements. For example, a div tag. If I said inner text of a div to div tag, what does that do? Right? We'll see in a second. Then I have this event listener. And if you haven't taken events, and probably you don't know what events are, let's talk about events a little bit. What is an event? And remember that JavaScript is an event-driven language, right? And you're going to say, okay, but I don't know what events are, so what does that mean? So let's go back to our board, right? So imagine if I have this button. I'm just going to delete this again and draw this thing again. So I have this button. Here's my button. This time it's an orange button. Sure, okay? And, I have my mouse button and my mouse, and I hover over it and I click onto it, all right? Well, the clicking that I'm doing on the page, right? Unless I'm listening for the click, it does nothing. I can click, I can try and drag and highlight and do whatever I want on my HTML page. But unless I specifically program it, right, it will be ignored. Any kind of thing that I'm doing on the page. However, what I can do is I can listen for some kind of user input. That's what I can do. And I create something called an event listener. Almost like it's an object, it's a special method that listens for different types of events, okay? An example of this would be the click event. And there's many, many different types of events, right? By the way, if you look at your PowerPoint from last week, a bunch of events have been listed in your PowerPoint. And if you read chapter 1 of the book, it talks about different types of events, right? But the most common ones for buttons are the click event, mouse over, mouse out. Those are the 3 most common ones, right? And there's also mouse down, but we don't have to think about that for now. All right, so those kind of different kinds of events. But those events, I'm listening for those events. Okay, so now if I listen for it, but I don't do anything with it, again, it gets ignored. So there's 2 parts of events, the event listener and the event handler. Event listener, I'm listening for a specific event. I have to program that. Event handler, okay, now I heard it. Now what I got to do? I got to do something about it, right? And if I don't do anything about that event, right, then it gets ignored. Let's try that out. And there's two ways to do this. I can do it inline, but I need to use this new add event listener method. And if you notice, it has a bunch of stuff. It tells you, oh man, I can take all this stuff, right? But what I did in essence is a couple things here. Let's just kind of back up. So I'm going to back up to this part right here. Okay, so hey, I want to make a new event listener called, I'm using add event listener on my button. Why can I use add event listener? Because my button is an HTML element. And I can put an event listener on any HTML element, including the body itself, okay? Which means the whole document. The whole document. I can make an event listener on the whole document, okay? All right, so if I type this in, if I go dot add event listener, you can see that it comes up with code hinting. And then it says, hey, look, you can do all this stuff. Abort, activate, before, blah, blah, all this kind of stuff. But it's a button, and all we care about is like 3 main events. Click, mouse over, mouse out. Those are the 3 ones. Click is the click event, when you're clicking on the button. Mouse over is when you take your mouse and you physically go over the button with the mouse. Mouse out is when you're over the mouse, over the button already, and you leave the button. Over and out. All right, pretty straightforward stuff, right? Okay, so those are the 3 different kinds of event we want to handle today. So I want to listen for them. So if I say something like this, so click, the click event. Okay, I added the click event, but this doesn't do anything. If I just did this, there's just a listener. I'm listening, but I have no way of doing anything, right? I need to have another part of this, which is I put comma, and now I create something called this handler. All right, now it says listener, but at the end of the day, what I want you to think about is there's 2 parts, the event listener and the event handler. And the event handler is what I'm making. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You can do it inline anonymous, like I did it. So you can make an anonymous function, right? And inside the body of your anonymous function here, inside the body right here, you can put some stuff, which is what I did. Typically, it's okay for a single mouse click, right? Or a single type of button or whatever. But what if you want to have a bunch of buttons do the same thing? Like every time I click on any button, it does something, right? Then I want to have a shared function. And so you can have a named function. For example, if I wanted to make a named function, where, hey, today's function day, right? Let's make another function. So make another function, right? I don't know why it's not indenting properly, but we'll fix it in a second. I want to make another function called, as an example, about button click. About button click. Notice the function tells you what it does, right? The about button click function, right? Okay, cool. This is about button click function, okay? It does stuff. And so I say that I add an event listener to the button. I want to listen for the click event. This is the event I'm listening for, right? And now I want to handle the event with an anonymous or named function. Here I'm going to make it a named function. I'm going to call about button click. But I'm not going to put the parentheses. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to reference the function that I need. So this is the syntax. So I'm saying, hey, the about button click function is the one that I want to use to handle the click event. That's what I'm saying here. Okay? Event listener, this is the event listener. Right? Event handler is this part of the event listener. Now, some people may argue that's not true. It's all part of the event listener, but it doesn't matter. I want you to separate it in your mind. I want you to separate the event listener as this part, this line here, and the event handler as this part. Okay? So here's my about button click. My about button click event now does nothing. I'm listening. I have a handler, but my handler does nothing, right? Because I haven't put any code in there. If I wanted to put a code like I did before, and I say something like console.log about button clicked, right? That could be done. Now it does something. I listen for it. When I click on the button, we say that it raises an event. Guys and girls, this is a technical talk for what you have to think about. I raise an event. The event is raised, which means I'm okay now. Somehow we have a trigger, right? And we're listening for that trigger with our event listener, and we're responding to it with our event handler. Okay? Listener, handler. And I'll put that in there. So this is the about button click event handler, comments. Same comment style that we see in other places as well, right? And this is the about button event listener, right? Listener, handler. Now this is only one way of doing it. Remember, we can also do it inline with an anonymous function, okay? And a lot of times it makes sense to do so. Now we have a problem. We do have a problem. We have, in essence, even though we've kind of referenced it here, we have this function here. When JavaScript interprets this thing, it doesn't look at it like this. It looks at it like, I have this function that's inside of this event listener. It's almost like a separate scope. And notice that this function is inside this function, right? So you can have functions within function, within functions, within functions, within functions, within functions in JavaScript. And sometimes it's called function hell, right? Yeah, because what happens is you can have as many functions as you want inside JavaScript, right? And it creates a scope within a scope, 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 right? And every scope has its own variables and, context. Function hell. Actually, in Node.js, it's called callback hell. And you can look that up. It's really true. Callback hell. And this, in effect, that's what this is. This is called a callback. So a callback function is just a function that we're calling back after we successfully hear a click event. So after the click event is heard, we call a function. This is the function we're calling back, the callback function, right? And so I can have as many of these callback. What if this function here called another function? And it can. And that function called another function. And that function called two other functions, right? So we put all these things on the call stack, right? And remember the call stack. Did you guys learn about the call stack in C#? The call stack, the way it works is this. It's like this. If I call start, right? Well, let's look at the function, the call stack we have here. This is the first function on the call stack because this is the outer function, right? So this gets called when the page loads, right? This function, it listens to this onload event. By the way, we're going to redo this onload event in a second, all right? There's another way of putting this together, right? Okay. So here's the window load. It calls the start function. So now the start function is on the call stack, right? Okay, cool. And the start function, if we're on the home page, calls the home content function. So the home content goes on the call stack on top of the start function, right? And then the home content function, it listens for an about button, right? Click. And so when it's clicked, that about button goes on the call stack. And then when it's resolved, it kind of pops off the call stack. And it keeps popping off until you're back to the original function. That's what happens. When all those functions get resolved, when they're done, all the code is executed, all those things come off the call stack. So Stack Overflow, right? Going back to Stack Overflow happens when there's too many functions on the call stack. Stack Overflow. There's not enough room on the stack to handle all the functions that have been called on the stack, and so hence Stack Overflow. Very, very high level way of thinking about it, by the way, when I just said it, and please forgive me for people who are watching and they're cringing and they're going, God, that's a really super simplified way of talking about it. Yes, it is, but for this class, it's perfectly good. So yeah, so what you're thinking about, if you think about this, here's my about button click. Other things to note about events before we continue on. Events are asynchronous. You're all going to kill me for this one. JavaScript is a funny language, right? And I got to teach it to you. It's almost like I'm teaching it to you backwards. I'm teaching advanced stuff first and then some basic stuff after. Because if you don't do the advanced stuff, the basic stuff doesn't work. Right? The way it works, right? So, so whenever I have an event, there's a couple things that happen. When I have an event listener and the whole event model triggers asynchronously, which means as soon as I make this event, it triggers outside of the regular line of execution. Remember, normally programs run in line number order, right? They go line 1, line 2, line 3, and they just execute each line in the code, right? And it jumps around. If I have a function, it goes to that function, executes all those things, and then goes back to where it goes, wherever the calling point was. So for example, if I read this start function, right? And if I go to line 29, and if it executes home content, it executes the line 29, and it does the home content, right? Starts here, you know, declares a variable, changes the name of the inner text to about, so sets up this event listener, right? And in fact, setting up the event handler at the same time, and then goes back to line 29 and goes to break, and then exits this whole switch statement and goes down here and starts doing this console commands, one after the other, right? And then when this whole start function is done, it exits back to here and comes to here. That's what happens. That's how it goes by, right? But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Once I've done this, this triggers asynchronously, which means it can trigger as many times as I click that button. It doesn't wait for the page to load for me to be able to click that button. It can click it as many times as I want. It's almost like concurrent processing, like a separate thread is created for that event. And it can trigger as many times as I want alongside with other events that are triggering all at the same time. Okay? It's not in order. And I want you to remember that. In JavaScript, a lot of stuff is asynchronous. If you make it synchronous, that means it has to wait for something to finish before the next thing starts in consecutive order. This is concurrent order. This happens at the same time. And so sometimes event handling is also thought about as some form of concurrency. Concurrent means at the same time, right?
A lot of events, they are concurrent without waiting for it to finish or waiting for
it just keeps going, right? It just works. It doesn't wait for concurrency. It just can just work, just keeps going until whenever you have. So this event listener, what we've created, an event handler, it runs asynchronously, and it doesn't matter, right? Now, here's something to note. Once I've added an event listener to an object like this button, and I want you to think about this button now as an element, an HTML element object, right? Once I've added it on, it's always there forever, as long as the document's alive. Sometimes we want to remove it, and we can do that by remove event listener, okay? So we want to set up an event listener, and when we're done with it, if we never want to use it again, we can remove event listener. But that only happens in certain cases where the document, the index.html or whatever the document is, lives for a long time for whatever reason. We're running some kind of crazy application in there, right? Right now, there's no crazy application. It's just a button click, right? So we don't care. But if in another context where we have a lot of stuff going on, like we're showing graphics or something like that, then we may want to elect to remove the event listener because it causes memory allocation. I allocate memory for all this stuff. I allocate memory for my variable, and I've allocated memory now for my event listener and my event handlers. And for every function is an object, right, in JavaScript. So my about button click function is an object, and I have memory allocated for that, right? And I've allocated memory for everything. So that's a little brief about event handlers. We're going to get back into that more later on. So let's add a couple more. So I've got this click event, and I want to have some other events, right? I can go about button dot add event listener, and then mouse over, right? And then we can do a new event, which I don't have yet, a new event handler called about button over. We'll call it over event. We don't have that yet, right? And we'll do about button dot add event listener, right? And then we'll say mouse out, right? And we'll call this new event about button out. We don't have those two events yet, right? And notice I got no errors happening. It's nothing telling me that there's a problem, right? So now I have to create them. I'm just going to create them up here, just like we've done before. We'll make two. Here's my about button over. I can spell it properly. And we'll also make this another one, about button out. Make sure that this is a function, not function, or whatever I spelt, right? That gave me the error. So I've got these two event handlers and these two event lists. I'm actually listening for three different types of events: a click event, a mouse over, and a mouse out event, right? And I have this about button over and about button out, right? So about button over, when I hover over it, wouldn't it be nice if I could change the color of the button? I mean, it's kind of changing already. If I look back at the this, and if I kind of go over here, you can see how that's kind of changing. And this is happening because Bootstrap. Bootstrap set that, the hover event, right? That pseudo element in CSS that basically covers the hover. And if I hover out, it takes that hover away. But let's change something else. Instead of this, can I change the opacity of a button? Like I want to change the opacity so it's not fully opaque. I want to make it somehow transparent. I'm going to do that. How do I change the transparency of a button? How do I change the transparency of any element? CSS, right? CSS. I change the transparency with CSS, right? So I know I can add style to a button. So I can say something like this. I can say, well, about button, right? Now you're going to get mad at me, right? Here's my about button, dot, and then it says, but I have no idea what you mean by about button. Why wouldn't my about button over have any idea of what about button is? Now, come on. I want you guys to think about this really nicely. Tell me why there's no idea. About button has no idea. About button over, this event, has no idea what the about button is. Why? Come on. Think about it. Because of the context. Because this scope does not know anything about button because about button was created within this scope. Here's where this is the scope of the about button. Right? This scope is where about button was created. And when you create a variable called about button, right, as an example, and this scope right here inside the home content function, the about button lives and dies in this content. There is nothing, it doesn't escape this home content function whatsoever. So I have to hook into this about button some other way. There must be some other way. And what we have actually is we have an event object by default, right? Every time we raise each one of these things as an event handler. So we have an event object that is passed to these objects automatically. I said automatically for a reason, because you can't see them. I haven't passed any kind of parameters, right? But there is this transparent parameter that's been passed to the events every single time. And I can do something like even put it in here like this, event, right? And if I call this, instead of event, let's just call it E, right? Doesn't matter what we call it, E, event, something. And if I do something like this, if I say that event dot, and then I'm trying to find the different objects, right? It doesn't kind of work. I don't get any code hinting here. But actually, this event object, which is passed, to the about button over, it actually does exist, right? And I can say that event.currentTarget. Unfortunately, I'm not getting code hinting. I'm sorry. I'm not getting code hinting because JavaScript doesn't always give you code hinting, right? Event.currentTarget is the button. That's the button that I'm looking at, the event.currentTarget. And if you look online to find this stuff, I'm sorry, I know I'm getting into advanced stuff, but there's nothing I can do. So if I go event.currentTarget, if I look this up, right, up online, so here's event.currentTarget, and there's some examples of this, right? So here's my event, e.currentTarget.style.visibility. Hey, look, it's almost what I want, right? e.currentTarget.style. Right? That's what I want, right? Now, they call it E. I'm going to call it event. It doesn't matter. But current target basically says, hey, whatever the current target is, right, of my click, whatever raised the event, whether it's a button, a paragraph, whatever it is, whatever element is, I can say that that's what I want to target. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a button right now. I don't know what the hell it is. I can't treat it like a button. I can only treat it like some kind of sender of the event, right? So if I do that, event.currentTarget, right, and I can do that like it says here, .style, and like it says .style, we don't get any code hinting. But if I want to look at style, so in another context, if I took it down here, I could say something like my about button .style and you can see that there's a bunch of things I can do with my style. I can do my background, my clip, my visibility, and if you look down here, like there's a bunch of stuff we can do with style, right? Style is a method that belongs to all HTML elements, right? So if I scroll down here, I can say my border color, my border left. These are all things that I can do with style. Clip, color path, as an example. CSS float, CSS text, cursor, change my cursor style to something else, right? My font style, bunch of other stuff here, right? And if I keep going down, what I'm really looking for is something like opacity or transparency, right? Let's see if we have that. So if I scroll down to the O, and if we have some kind of, we don't have opacity, right? So here, oh, here it is. Here's opacity, right? So if I say opacity is equal to, and then some number, right? Well, we can't, we have to do something like, well, what is it? Is it like, 0.4 in a quotations, or is it 0.4? Whatever it is, right? So no, we know that that's what it is, style.opacity. And I'm sorry that we're not getting code hinting here, right? So I saw that style.opacity, right, is equal to, let's say, 0.7. Let's not make it 0.4, right? And then when we hover out, we want to change the style, as an example, and we'll make it maybe more drastic, back to 1, right? We want to make that back to 1. So 1 means fully opaque again. When we're out, we can see it again. When we're over, it's somehow transparent. Let's see if that works. And it may not. Let's see if that what happens, right? So I saved it. I'm going to go back to my thing. And if I cover over, it's kind of hard to see, but it works. Let's make it really more drastic. Let's make it so like it's 0.3. Right? Ready? See that? So as I hover over, the opacity of the object drops to 30%. Right? And as I hover out, it goes back to 100%. Hover over, hover out. Click. Right? Mouse out, mouse over. Those are the events that are being triggered right now, asynchronously. Right? So I can do all the same things. All the same. I can hover over and click at the same time.
But every time you mouse over, memory they call in the
No, every time it raises the event, it calls that function every single time. Oh yeah, it'll keep calling that function, that handler, over and over again, right? It doesn't create it, it holds it in memory. It's holding in memory, it's held in memory right now. That event listener is held in memory, and I'm just accessing it. That's all I'm doing. Okay? So that's what this thing does. So I can actually use my about button over and about button out, but I can't mention the about button itself because it does not exist in this context. In this particular scope, there is no about button. All we know is the event sender, right? The event target, the current target of the event, right? Which is the button. So it's kind of a backwards way of getting to it, but that's the only way we know about it. If we were to make this, the other way to do it is if we made the about button global in scope, right? Either putting it way out here or putting it inside function scope up here, right? We can do that too. But that means it's available to all the functions. But here's the problem if we did that. Okay, so let's just do this. Hold on. I'm going to do it, right? Just because you guys are, curious people, right? Here's a about button. We can do this too, right? There's an about button. And notice I just said let about button. And what let about button does is it creates that variable. But there's no value to it. And it does, I don't know what type it is right now. It's just undefined. Yay! Undefined button, right? But now if I go down here and I go do one of these, yeah, I can say that the about button now is of type any. See how it says any? There is no button type, right? I can't declare it as any kind. And in fact, I won't get any code hinting anymore, right? It's really bizarre. Like, for example, if I start typing about button, right? And let's say I know I may not get code hinting. It might prevent me from getting code hinting. And it might give me other things that shouldn't go along with about button, because at this point, I don't know what kind of a button is. It says any. That's another type, by the way. Any is a type. It says, I don't know what type it is, right? That's what that JavaScript says. And from a data type perspective, hey, I don't know what type it is. I'm just going to guess, right? And it's of type any. So that what happens is if I did this, then in here, I have access to it because I could do something like about button. Oops. Here's about button dot style dot opacity, right, is equal to 0.3. I could do that, right? I don't have to use event current target because I know I have access to the about button because it's inside of the outside scope. From a scope perspective, this scope starts here and this curly brace and ends all the way down here at the bottom, right? This is the scope of the function, of this anonymous self-executing function, this IFI. It has all of this scope. It has this namespace, if you will, okay? So if I declare my about button here, this is functional scope. So this is like my function scope, if you will. I want to almost call it class scope, but it's not really. It's almost like my namespace, function scope, right? Whereas this is inside. If I declare it in here, it would be inside of my home content function scope, right?
It is a variable.
Yeah, it's a variable. That's what this is. That's what this is too. This is a variable, but all variables in JavaScript are kind of like objects too. Anyway, so I could do it this way. I'm just putting it out there that this is something you could do. Okay. Other things to note. We had this window.onload down here, and we use this old version onload. Remember, window is the window object. Onload is a method that belongs to the window object that listens for the window to load. That's the onload listener. That's another way to do it. But we could do it like this. Window.add event listener, right? And we're listening for the load event, right? And then on the load event, start. So we're raising a listener, concurrent listener, right? An event, an asynchronous listener that's waiting for the window to load. And when the window loads, it's going to call the start method right here. And to know that this works, if you really want to, you can say that, you know, just like we did down here where it says app started, we probably want to move this stuff up here, this stuff here. Let's move this back to the top, right? Just so that we can put this in here. All right, so app started, here's my title and all that kind of stuff, right? And I'm just going to clean up some of this stuff so we don't have any extra white space. By the way, good thing about what Visual Studio Code does is if I highlight everything with Control-A, right-click, and then I want to format my document, it will do that. It'll make it look nice. So reformat my document so everything is spaced nicely, all the functions are in the right order, and the right spacing, and all that kind of stuff. It looks nice. Okay, so this should do this part right here, this window.addEventListener, load. Instead of onload, whenever you have the word on and then something else afterwards, the something else afterwards is the event. On load. It's like saying window.addEventListener load. That's what this is.
Meaning that this onload method
is the event listener.
It's the classical one?
No, this is the old one that we try not to use. Yeah, this is better. This is the new way we want to use it all the time. Add event listener. And by the way, for old Microsoft browsers, we didn't have an event listener. Add event listener was not supported by the old IE browsers. We had to use attach event listener, something else. Microsoft, in the meantime, has adhered or moved towards more compatibility with every other browser, right? So now you can use an add event listener, and it would work on Microsoft as well as Chrome and Firefox and so on. All right, but that's what I want you guys to think about. So add event listener should work this way. Let's see if it works. So I mean, one thing is, yes. So let's see if this works, because what we want to try and do is we want to make sure that all my code here still works. So I'm going to go back to my page, right? And we're going to refresh, right? And it says that, well, hold on a second. Title is not defined at start. This is good. So it says, what title? I don't know what title is, guy. That's what it says. So let's go back. And let's see what I did. I made a mistake. This is good. Why? Because I declared title here, and I'm trying to print title out here. And so it doesn't know because it's not hoisting. Let's make this a var. Let's see what the difference is. If I put var here, it called title here, would it work? Yes, it would. Title would be undefined. That's why we don't use var. We use lets because we don't want this to happen, right? If we use let here instead, then we're going to get this error, which is good because it says, wait a minute, we haven't even declared the variable yet, and you're calling it before we declare it. Yeah, of course we did because we made a mistake. But we're going to move this up to here, and that should take care of that error. Oops. And just in case let's just reformat the document. Okay, there we go. And if you go back to this, you can see now that it works, no problem. And let's see that it actually works. I can hover over this. I see both the color change and the opacity change because of my hover event, right? And if I click onto it, it still clicks, no problem, right? This is important. And notice every time I click on it, this increments. It goes from nothing to 2. If I keep clicking on it, it goes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It counts how many times I'm clicking, right?
It doesn't respond once.
Well, it responded, but it keeps adding to this. It keeps on putting another click, because this is outputting to the console. Okay. All right. Questions around functions, functional scope, event handlers, event listeners. We covered all that stuff today, right? We're going to see it again. This is not the last time, like I keep saying to you guys, that we're going to cover stuff, right? Hey, notice that something was weird. I used event here, and I used event here. But guess what? In the parameter list here, I did it on purpose. I don't have event in the parameter list here, but somehow I was able to use it anyway. Because it's implicitly passed, right, into this all event handlers, if you will, have this phantom event or a parameter that gets passed in here. That's what happens. So it'll still work. What's that?
I thought this one going to be error, but it's not going to be error.
What? It's implicitly passed. Yeah. I know, I did it on purpose. So that's the way it works, right? So you can see that there's a bunch of different things that happen, and JavaScript is very forgiving and flexible, and that's bad. A language should be less forgiving and less flexible in some ways. For the most basic, if you're a new developer, if a language is too flexible, it causes problems because wait a minute, it's not giving me any errors. It should give me errors, right? Yeah, but JavaScript doesn't give you errors because JavaScript does exactly what you tell it to do, even if it's wrong. It'll do it, right? It'll try to anyway, and it won't even complain. That's the problem with JavaScript. So we use other languages to help us out, other code, to help us because we want to get some good code hinting to give us some errors, right? And we'll talk about that near the end of the course. Can't talk about it now. All right, so we talked about functions. We talked about functional scope a little bit, and there's some really great examples of this, right? So imagine that I have this function. I'm going to make another this function, okay? And we're going to call this function outer, right? And I have another function inside the function called inner, right? And I'll put another function in there called deep inner, right? Deep inner, sure. Yeah, I did it right the first time. All right, is this okay? Can I do this kind of stuff with functions? How about I keep going? Really deep, really deep inside, right? Okay, this is really deep, right? Can I do that? Okay, so there's a bunch of scopes here, right? Actually, there's the outer scope, which is way out here. That's the whole iffy scope up here, right? Then there's this functional scope here on the outer scope. And then there's the inner scope right here. And then there's the deep inner scope right here. And then the function scope and the other function scope over here, right? So these two functions. All right, so if I declare a variable out here, let's just declare this variable called let my outer variable, right, is equal to a number like 25 or 30, or let's say 30, let's say, right? Question, do I have access to it inside this function? How about in this function? How about in this function? How about in this function? Okay. What about this one? If I declare a variable here called let my inner variable, right, is equal to 10. Do I have access to this one here? How about here? How about here? How about here? How about out here? Oh, I'm glad you guys know that. That's good. Okay, what about if I do this? What's going on? What's this? What's this? Is this the same as this? Well, this is actually the local variable for this function that has the same name as this one, but it's a different one. Right? I'm telling you, people get confused, right? I'm just putting it out there, right? So this is just review for you guys. You should know about scope from C#, right? So it's the same rules for scope in JavaScript to mostly, right?
C# doesn't allow you to declare the same name.
Well, no, it will. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. It will allow you, but it just means that you will override the local function. I can show you in C# another time, but yeah, it'll allow you to do the same thing, right? So remember that what we're doing here is we're saying this my outer variable, which is a number, and how about this? My outer variable is a number, but those two variables are different. They're two different memory locations, right? And I can actually make this a name, like, like hello. I can totally do that. And that's totally allowable because this one is a string and this one is a number, and they're two different variables, right? And that's how JavaScript works. The scope kind of cascades down, right? So this inner scope knows about this one, and so do all the other ones. And if I make another variable, like in my deep inner variable, if I say var or deep inner variable is equal to true, right? And I have this one here, which is a Boolean. And do I have access to my deep inner variable in my really deep inside function? This I do. And okay, this is really deep. Yes, I do. But do I have it in my inner? No, because it got declared here, and it doesn't. It's closed and it's enclosed. Hence closure, like inside this closure, which is a variable. All right, so I think I've covered the basics of functions, right? I think that's important for us to do because I want you guys to understand how functions work. Functions can also have return values, like we said. For example, if I had something that I wanted to calculate, right? I want to have this, I don't know, some function, add one function to another function or something like that, or one value to another. You can do that. For example, I want to calculate, I want to return pi, right? So I can make a function, right, called return pi, right? Kind of weird name for a function, but hey, what the heck? And I can say return math.pi, right? Math is a built-in library that has all math functions. If you call the math class, right, math itself has a bunch of different things like math.log, math.max, math.min, math.cos, math.sine, math.arctan, or atan2, or whatever. And all those functions, all the trigonometry functions, take radians, just as a default. But math also has some built-in or some properties like pi, as well as e, right? And a bunch of other things mathematical that you want. For now, we just want pi, right? So we want to return. This is kind of a simple, silly function. Return pi, right? But the return statement returns this, and this makes it so that, notice if I hover over the function now, it says that it's got a return type of number, right? So the whole function returns a number. That means if I call the return pi function, if I say something like, well, okay, here, I mean, it's only going to work in my about page, let's just say, right? And I can say that my number, right, is equal to, return pi. I can do that, right? And then if I want to console.log my number, right, it's only going to happen on my about page, right, because I'm switching it from my home page, right? It's not going to happen in my home page. And by the way, I probably shouldn't do that here. I should probably put a about content in there, right? Just like we did a home content. Notice that I didn't put it in any particular order, right? Let's make another function. It's all function day, right? So we're going to make lots of functions for you guys. Here's my function. We're going to call this, about content. And my about content, I'm going to steal this text, this code right here, and put it in here. Okay, there's my about content. And I'm going to call my about content here. So my home content, my about content, and I can have as many contents as I want for different pages. Again, not the most efficient way to do stuff. If I had 50,000 pages, like a big site, this would be like crazy. You'd be like, wait a minute, Tom, something's wrong here. I got 50,000 pages. This will not work for 50,000 pages. It works for some simple pages, 5 pages, no problem. 10 pages, no problem. 20 pages, no problem. 50,000 pages. Well, you don't want to do like switching this way. You want to think about another methodology, right? But home content, about content. So if you go to the about content, it calls the return pi method, right? And calculates this and returns this my number, right? And let's put some other stuff around it. So we'll say that my funky number equals to whatever my number happens to be. We don't know, right? Right now it's returning pi. And if I go to my about page, it says my funky number is 3.14159, blah, 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 right? But if I go to my home page, I got no such thing because it's not been called, because it only calls the home content, not the about content. And the about content function triggers, you know, this other function, which is up here, right? Function calling another function, calling another function, calling another function.
C# has access to this element bomb?
No. No. C# has other access to do different things.
So in any case, we have to use JavaScript.
The JavaScript is for HTML is the stuff that you're going to use. Right? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript go together. C#, that's something totally different, and you do something different with that if you're using ASP.NET or something else. Okay. Okay. So questions around this? Any questions? Are you guys all understanding what I've done here? You got this look on your face like, I don't know what the hell you've done right now. You're really confused the crap out of me. And did you watch the videos from? I know it's a lot. It's like 4 hours, right? So it's like that's the problem with videos too. You have to kind of sift through them because there's whatever I record. If I do 2 hours, 2 hours, right? You're gonna look through 2 hours of video on a bunch plus all your other courses. It's a lot. But the great thing about this is you can zero in on what you need for your exercises, your assignments, and your tests, right? So you can kind of study for the things that you need to study. All right, so and you can ignore my chatter, my stuff that I'm talking, like things I'm talking about right here. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of cool. But one of the things I wanted you to do today in your exercise was modify a paragraph, right, in my about page, right? So I'm going to go to my about page, and if you notice, I have this paragraph element with a class of lead, right? And I got this other paragraph element that says we will be adding to this page throughout the semester. We're going to add to this page now, right? In fact, what I want to do, right, is in my about page. So I'm in my about.html page. I want to wipe this stuff out. I'm going to have an empty paragraph tag. And inside my empty paragraph tag, I'm going to call this paragraph. I'm going to give it an ID of, you're going to hate me, paragraph. Actually, we can call it paragraph 1, paragraph 2, main paragraph, my paragraph, your paragraph. Call it whatever you want, right? It's just an ID. It's some way of hooking into that element, okay? That's what I want to do. This is part of your exercise, guys, so please pay attention because you're going to have to do this by the end of class, right?
So we could use any method like document write or HTML.
Never document write. Never use document write. Oh, my God. You might as well kill yourself if you're going to use document write. Don't do it. You're just destroying your page. Never do document write. Inner HTML is totally not what we want to do either. Okay, so there's two ways. So now that I have hooked into this paragraph in my about page, remember that I can only do this on my about page. Therefore, when I go back to my app.js, in my about content is where this has to go. If I put this in my home content or somewhere outside of here, and if I say document.getElementById paragraph, it's going to go, what the heck are you talking about? That's undefined. Error, right? So you want to kind of do it somewhere here. So if I say in my about content, I want to do kind of the same thing that I did here in my home content. Now, we also did a couple things here. In my home content, I actually created this about thing. And I'm going to clean this up. So I'm going to kind of clean this up. And so that way that we have consistency with what I've been doing. So I'm going to put this let statement here. I'm going to clean this like global function, global scope. I want to clean this up because we don't want that happening unless we need to. We don't need to do it right now. And so just like we did with our home page, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have another thing that says, hey, let paragraph equal to, okay, help me out. I want to hook into the paragraph. What do I do? What do I start with? No, not event. I'm hooking into the paragraph on my about page. Documents, thank you. I need to access my documents. Dot. How do I call to the document? Okay, but how do I call it? It's not ID. How do I call to it? What is it? No, it's not event. No. Come on. How about the other people? Get element by ID. There we go. Someone's listening. Get element by ID, right? I'm like, hey, document, right? Get this ID, right? And my ID is going to be what? Paragraph, right? Because that's what I called it, right? This is for your exercise, guys. FYI, right? Hey, paragraph. So now this paragraph, I've called it the same thing, right? Not to confuse you, but you can do whatever you want in JavaScript, right? And that's what I've done. I've called my ID. I've given my paragraph in my about page an ID of paragraph. That's what I made. That's my own personal choice. You can choose whatever you like. For the exercise, please leave it like this. right? And then I'm going to say let paragraph equal to document.getElementById paragraph. Yay, right? Now that I have my paragraph, I want to inject some kind of something, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to say, well, okay, paragraph, right? Dot. I want to access this. This is a string, object or whatever. Now I want to access my string. There's two ways to inject stuff inside my paragraph element, right? One is inner text, like we saw before, and the other one is text content. Those are the two things. There's slight differences between one and the other. So here's inner text. I can say something like my paragraph inner text is equal to, we will be changing the content of this paragraph throughout the semester. I think that's what I put in there, right? Go, right? And so what this does is it says, hey, go to the paragraph that I got with this paragraph, this thing here, get element by ID. I've hooked into the paragraph that's in my about page, right? And then I go to my inner text property, which is the child element of the paragraph. That's the child inside the paragraph. And I say, hey, change it to this. I set it to this, right? And if I go back, you can see that if I click on my about page, right? We will be changing the content of the paragraph throughout the semester because it is there, right? I put that there, okay? And if I want to show you that to prove it to you, instead of throughout the semester, we'll say one day, right? Go back, you can see that it's going to be, we change the paragraph of the thing one day, right? So I'm injecting my my text. By the way, this is also for your assignment number 1, right? We're going to have to inject stuff into the thing. I'm showing you how to do it right here with inner text, right? The other way to do it is with text content. Text content. So here's inner text and text content. There's two different things. And we want to explore what the different ones are, right? So if I go inner text content, here's text content. No difference, right? What is text content and what is inner text? So text content versus inner text. What's the difference? So again, if you look at the difference between the two, right? It says there's a few answers on Stack Overflow, and none of them are acceptable, by the way. Notice there's a lot of different answers, but there's no check mark. That's been an acceptable response, right? So again, it says none of the answers succeeds in providing the full explanation, hence this one. The key difference between inner text and text content are outlined very well in this blog post, inner text versus text content. Below, you can find a summary. Inner text was not standard, while text content was standardized earlier. And this is the difference, right? So some browsers don't like inner text. Other ones do. But text content is more standard across different browsers. So it works for some versus the others. And I got to point this out to you because there's different examples online. And you're like, Tom, I don't know why, but it's not working in IE, right? And Internet Explorer, the old one. And you're like, well, you used inner text. You didn't use text content. So I recommend using text content all the time. Yeah. They both seem to do the same thing in our context because we're using Chrome. Chrome takes both. But text content is the one that we recommend. All right? And that means we have to change this one too. Right? So this is text content. Unfortunately, there's no deprecation. It doesn't say, hey, it's deprecated or it doesn't work, right? It'll work. And if I save it and if I go back to my page, you can see that it still works. And if I go back to my home page, that still changes the whole thing. Everything happens. It's kind of annoying that it changes like that though, huh? Right? Because that's like weird injection, that we're doing, right? And it does that because a couple things. I'm using a Light Dash server. Remember, I'm serving this up with Light Server. Light Server is a mini web server that I have local on my machine, right? And even now, even how fast it is, we can still see the difference here, right? But online, it would be even slower. So now we know that this is the case. Now, if you look at the exercise for today, and I'd like you to take the rest of the time together to do your exercise here in class. You get about 20 minutes or 15 minutes, let's say, around, to try and do this with me in there. And I'm going to stop recording. But if you look at up online, let's see if I can get to there. under week 2, there is another exercise called hooking onto HTML elements, right? And what I asked you to do is using the exercise files from class, which I'm going to put up on GitHub in a second, right? Use the document.getElementByID method to hook into a p tag. You will need to give the paragraph tag an ID, which I did already. Create a string variable. This is wrong. Shouldn't say string variable. This should be what kind of variable is this? It's an HTML element variable, right? What we're doing here. We don't actually need to do this, but let's make it a little different, okay? So what I asked you to do here, I'm going to modify this in a second, right? So just to be clear, so here this paragraph is an HTML element, right? And here I'm saying paragraph.text content, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to let you do the rest. I'm going to say let my sentence be a string. You're going to make your sentence, whatever your sentence is going to be, right? And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you this right now. I'm just going to assign my sentence to this. You can do that, right? You put your sentence in here. That's what I want you to put. So instead of my paragraph, this string variable, I'm going to modify this. Edit. I don't want to do it here. I want to do it under assessments. Just a second. Just that way we're clear on what I'm looking for. So you guys are like, what are you looking for, Tom? What do you want? I want you guys to make I'll say the variable name, my sentence, and initialize it with a short sentence, whatever you want, right? Use the inner text or text content. Which one should you use? Text content. I'll accept both for today. Of the paragraph element to inject the paragraph string. And I'm kind of giving you the solution. Again, I want you to try this out on your own. Oops. And I'm going to put this up. You can use my code if you really wish. But there's a couple things you need from a submission perspective. You need a zip archive of your project files in eCentennial and a link to your GitHub repo for this project, which means you may have to create another one. And what I want you to do is name your repo COMP125-summer 2018-lab2. Okay. I think that's pretty good for you guys for 1% of your final grade. So I'm going to kind of save and close, and I'll let you guys to it, right? And I will stop recording, and I'll give whoever's in the class a hand for these last minutes. Again, it's due tonight at midnight, so you don't have to rush to do it right now if you don't want to. But I recommend if I'm here, I can help you, and it's 2 seconds, get it done. And I'm going to put it up on GitHub too. Yeah. So I'm going to put this up on GitHub before I stop. I'm going to use this method today. So where I modified these 2 files, I'll say updated project, right? And then I'll push. There we go. And that should be up on GitHub for you in about a second or so. There we go. It's up. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now. And remember that next week, if you want to, kind of move ahead, we're going to hit chapter 3 of our book. So kind of read ahead if you can. And if you look at our recording from the first week, there's a schedule of what we're doing. But this is exercise 2 or lab 2 that you're going to get 1% for. Remember, there's 14 weeks. There's a potential of 14 different labs minus, let's say, 2 for the tests. So that means like there's 12 different labs potentially. And there's only 10% I can give you. That means there's 2 bonus labs somewhere in there, right? Get them all done, guys. It's an extra. It's 1% every time you're in class or every week that we're together. Okay, that's it for me. I will sign off right now. You guys can go ahead and do what you have to do.